Muslim Filipinos have a historical experience of marginalization, oppression, and brutalization both in the hands of the colonizers and of the Filipino elite. Among many instances of violence inflicted to them as a people, one event stands out for causing the spark that gave birth to the Muslim liberation movement, the Jabidah Massacre. More than 50 years since the fateful massacre of young Muslim men in Corregidor, controversies regarding the truth behind the massacre still abound. Pundits of today still ask the question, did the Jabidah Massacre really happen? Join us and let's weigh in on the 10th episode of Contested Philippine Histories. I am Becal Porja.
I am Dee Candelaria.
And I am Aaron Malyari.
And you are listening to PODKAS, Conversations on Philippine History, Politics, and Society.
Alright, another week, another interesting issue dito sa podcast. So, Jabidah Massacre. I'm sure a lot of our listeners already have a vague idea about this issue, especially if they take some level of interest in the Marcos years.
And in the history of Muslim Mindanao, which, despite being so important in the narrative of the nation, has always been sidelined, I mean, Filipino students would not always recognize how integral Mindanao's history and experience is to the network of Southeast Asian polities that predated and transcended our colonial experience.
Agreed. In fact, we can argue that the ambiguous and contested character of our knowledge on Jabidah Massacre is symptomatic of the importance or non-importance rendered on understanding the experience of the Muslim Filipinos. And of course, the Jabidah Massacre itself was a tragic manifestation of the Muslims' historic marginalization and oppression in the Philippine society.
That is why I think that this episode is crucial. We need more conversations about this issue because of the intersecting significance both of Muslim history and of Marcos years. And Bangsamoro right now is going through a transition towards a more preferred style of autonomy ng ating mga Muslim brothers and sisters. So, this is a great opportunity to talk about what really started the Muslim independence movement in the first place.
Alright, so ano nga ba ang Jabidah Massacre? Anong talagang nangyari? What really happened? And more importantly, what were its implications? So, its history actually dates back to the Macapagal administration, which preceded Marcos. So, President Diosdado Macapagal rekindled the Philippine government's interest in Sabah. So, masalimuot itong bahagi na ito ng kasaysayan kasi the Philippine claim to Sabah was based on the assertion that the Sultan of Borneo gifted Sabah to the Sultan of Sulu as a reward when the latter supposedly assisted the Sultan of Borneo in quelling a rebellion in the 1600s. So, yun daw, kaya ang Sabah ay bahagi ng Sulu, kung ganon. Pero ang claim naman ng Malaysia, that territory was bought already by the British North Borneo Company. So, syempre, nung natapos yung British colonization, Sabah was effectively turned over to Malaysia. So, masalimuot yan, magulong usapin yan. And at the same time, very historical. So, siguro we can talk about this at length in a separate episode. But anyway, so, sinubukan ni Diosdado Macapagal na buhayin ang claim na ito noong early 1960s. So, kumbaga, there was already a stage set for Marcos when he took over the presidency in 1965. But while Macapagal's approach to the issue was diplomatic, Marcos's was not.
So fast forward to the Marcos years, Marcos aimed at reclaiming Sabah through an operation called Oplan Merdeka. So mahilig si Makoy sa mga ganyang Oplan, di ba? Oplan Sagittarius, na iba pang mga ganyan. So, but what was Oplan Merdeka? So it was only supposedly known to a handful of people, and the plan was to train a special commando unit called Jabidah. And this commando unit was supposed to create confusion and disorder in Sabah. So it was envisioned that such a disorder would either put the Philippine government in a stronger position to take over the island, or the residents of Sabah themselves would secede from the then infant Malayan Federation.
This plan was actually shrewd in different levels. Una, the approach was, ayun nga sabi ni Aaron, it's not exactly diplomatic. In fact, it was very treacherous to say the least kasi they planned to sow distrust, trouble, and confusion among the people there. And second, at this point, Malaysia was a newly independent federation. Kailan lang ba sila talaga naging independent? 1963 lang. Tapos yung Singapore, kakaalis lang sa kanila noong 1965. So Marcos knew that at this point, they were, very unstable and very vulnerable. So it was an opportune time for him to swoop in and take Sabah. And lastly, the Oplan Merdeka and the organization of the Jabidah unit was done in utter deceit. The young Muslims recruited allegedly did not know what they were really up to.
Tama. So, dadagdag yan sa mga kawing-kawing na kontrobersya ng Jabidah Massacre. So, let's dive in. So initially, mayroon daw na around 17 recruits nung una from the areas of Sulu and Tawi-Tawi who were deployed in Sabah. And then these recruits blended with the people there, with the Sabah residents. So itong 17 Philippine agents na to, ano yung main tasks nila? So they were there mainly to perform psychological warfare. So ang target nila yung mga taga-Sulu talaga or taga-Tawi-Tawi. So supposedly mga Pilipino itong mga to na nag-emigrate sa Sabah kasi malapit lang malamang mga magkakamag-anak rin yung mga yan. They wanted this group of people to secede from Malaysia. So anong ginawa? They were asked to organize communities, ganyan. And by 1967, Army Major Eduardo Martelino, who was at the helm of Oplan Merdeka, started training some 200 recruits in Tawi-Tawi. So madami At kaya sila madaming na-recruit ay dahil these young men, sabi nila ages 18 to 30, were promised a career in the armed forces. At aminin natin, talagang prestigious at coveted ang career sa military, especially at this point. Madaming opportunities, benefits, privileges na akaakibat yan.
And by the end of this year, around 135 to 180 Muslim trainees were transported to Corregidor. Ito ay ayon sa expose ni Senator Ninoy Aquino. So upon arrival in Corregidor, doon nag-start ang kanilang rigid training. Again, they were under the guise of being recruited to be part of the Philippine military. They weren't only drilled, and they didn't just go to lectures, they were also tasked to set up their training grounds. So the recruits from Tawi-Tawi were confined to a specific area in the island. So some of these recruits were tausog at ayon nga sa mga salaysay, the tausogs were discriminated in the camp. They were paid late or not paid at all. So may mga namumuong grievances within the group. At nararamdaman di umano ng mga military superiors sila that things can escalate into a mutiny. By February 1968, may mga Muslim recruits ang pauuwiin because they were complaining. Meanwhile, some trainees already showed restlessness. Kasi naman, they were not given the pay that they were promised and they were also not fed well. Tapos, the sleeping quarters were also miserable, to say the least.
So, sinasagad yung tolerance ng mga trainees, diba? So, ganyan yung nararanasan nila. Tapos, nakikita nila yung mga higher-ups nila, hayahayong buhay. Sa hotel natutulog, sa Bayview Hotel daw, so short ferry ride to Corregidor. Damang-dama talaga yung relative deprivation, kumbaga. So, around 62 trainees wrote a petition to Marcos himself. They secretly wrote this letter and they listed their complaints and demands. After that, Major Martelino paid them a visit and promised improvements in their living condition and promised them their pay. True enough, they were paid. They were fed well, parang fiesta daw. They were given some luxuries like good coffee. They were given entertainment at night. And then a bad news came.
Anong nangyari? 58 trainees were basically fired by the end of February 1968. So, pinag-resign sila and they were disarmed. And then after that, around 60 to 70 trainees were transferred sa Rizal, if I'm not mistaken. And then after around 2 weeks, mga March 16, 1968, 24 men were also taken away. And then after 2 days, 24 trainees were asked to leave and go home as well. So, batch-batch silang pinapauwi. So, for example, etong March 18 na to, parang there were 12 men asked to go home ng 2 a.m. Tapos after 2 hours, 12 men ulit yung pinauwi 4 a.m. Dito sa huling batch of 12 trainees, dito kasama si Jibin Arula. So, sino si Jibin Arula? Supposedly, siya yung lone survivor in the massacre that would take place. At ito yung kwento ni Jibin Arula. And this was lifted from the narrative written by Marites Vitug and Glenn De Gloria in their book Under the Crescent Moon. So, kwento ni Arula.
When we went to the airport, on a weapons carrier truck, accompanied by 13 non-Muslim trainees armed with M16 and carbines. When we reached the airport, our escorts alighted ahead of us. Then Lieutenant Eduardo Nepomuceno ordered us to get down from the truck and line up. Nepomuceno was later killed in Corregidor under mysterious circumstances. As we put down our bags, I heard a series of shots. Like dominoes, my colleagues fell. I got scared. I ran and was shot at in my left thigh. I didn't know that I was running towards a mountain. By 8 a.m., I was rescued by 2 fishermen on Caballo Island near Cavite.
So yun na yun, diba? Mabilis yung mga pangyayari. After the massacre, the Philippine army swooped in and cleared the site and erased traces of the massacre. So they found burnt bodies and they were asked to collect all of these and dispose them. So the army also cleaned the area of the bullet shells. So yung mga katawan binalot sa mga poncho, tinalian nila ng mabibigat na bato, tapos supposedly tinapon sa dagat. So walang eksaktong bilang ng mga pinatay, puro estimate base sa Senate investigation at sa testimony nito ni Jibin Arula.
At syempre dinedeny ito ni Marcos at ng armed forces. Alam naman natin, the military as an institution, particularly a very masculine institution, is also very secretive. Sabi nila it was a very fantastic tale. It was obviously fabricated by the opposition sa pangunguna daw ni Ninoy Aquino. At sabi pa nila, gawa-gawa din lang ng Malaysia ito when they learned of the plan to take Sabah. Pero ang catch, may ganitong kabigat at kabrutal na allegation. Pero walang ini-initiate or ini-sponsor na investigasyon ang Marcos administration. I mean, save for the Senate and congressional hearings, walang real investigation na nangyari. Siyempre, oposisyon yung source ng issue at mga impormasyon kasi sila ang may interest na i-expose yung ganitong klaseng transgression.
That's right. This was a very serious allegation para ipagkibit-balikat lang, So more than 50 years since this tragedy, a lot of questions and debates still remain. Halimbawa, some people felt that the attempt of Marcos to take over Sabah, na sa paniniwala nila ay teritoryo natin, sabi ng iba ay it wasn't necessarily wrong. Kahit na obviously it was a gigantic failure, They believed that it was done in the nation's interest. Again, masalimuot yung usapin na yan ng Sabah at hanggang ngayon, it still taints the diplomatic relations between the Philippines and Malaysia. I think it was only in 2018 when Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin tweeted and stirred some controversies. Kasi sabi niya sa tweet niya, ang Sabah ay hindi pagmamayari ng Malaysia or something like that.
Very irresponsible.
Yes,
why
na
would you say
statement
that?
from a foreign secretary, right?
Yeah.
So, pero I think ang pinakamahalagang implication talaga ng Jabidah ay hindi iyang territorial dispute na yan over Sabah. Instead, ito yung in-spark niya ng movement sa Mindanao.
Yes, a lot of scholars would say that the Muslim liberation movement in Mindanao that has been causing so much conflict in the region was caused by this single event. So, parang siya talaga yung isang conjuncture na nagtulak sa increasingly politicized Muslim population in Mindanao to really call for secession. So, nag-backfire talaga. So, I think nabanggit natin ito sa episode natin on martial law last season.
Yeah, banggitin ko lang din na recently, and when I say recently, maybe around 5 years ago, may parang historical revisionism na nagaganap tungkol sa Jabidah. In fact, people, particularly, I think, very pro-Marcos individuals, have called Jabidah Massacre as the biggest hoax, as one of the first fake news daw ng mga dilaw. And it's bothering because this is really a very problematic historical controversy kasi nga limited yung ating primary sources available about this. In fact, ang natatangi lang talagang source natin ito ay si Jibin Arula na eyewitness. But at the same time, nakikita rin natin na mayroon din recognition ang government in a way when the Mindanao Peace Garden was established in Corregidor to memorialize the Jabidah Massacre. But then again, these two things coexisting, the government somehow recognizing that this event happened, quote-unquote, kasi parang hindi directly sinasabing nangyari talaga dun sa marker sa Corregidor. But at the same time, may mga nagsasabing hoax itong Jabidah Massacre. But I think what we are certain is that it was the event that started or that sparked the Muslim liberation movement, the Muslim independence movement. And we know how that particular movement affected the Philippines and affected the Muslims in Mindanao and Mindanao in itself.
Yeah, I agree. Kasi 'di ba, parang ito yung event na kung titingnan mo siya kung siya ay myth man o siya ay totoong nangyari. 'Di ba? At the end of the day, it's a story about how the government, at least how the government in Manila supposedly views these people from Mindanao, these Muslim men to be really readily expendable, 'di ba? That you will send them out on a mission that would endanger their lives and endanger the people of Sabah. And then when conflict arose between them and the government, you were just ready to just exterminate them. No? So it speaks of this bigger conversation about how the central government of the state views the people in the periphery as someone na pwede mong gamitin na expendable, 'di ba? So I think yun yung isang discursive impact niya nung napag-usapan yung Jabidah Massacre. Totoo man siya o myth, no, at the end of the day, they both sparked conversations about that relationship between Mindanao and Manila. Kaya talagang yung sentiments ng mga tao ay talagang tumindi at nagkaroon ng panawagan na kung ganyan din naman ang trato sa atin ng gobyerno, humiwalay na lang tayo.
Tsaka syempre, mahalaga rin i-point out na sino ba talagang responsible din. So ibig sabihin nito, yung naging yung karahasan, yung uncertainty, yung unrest sa Mindanao could actually be rooted to a single person. And this is Marcos. And Marcos prior to martial law. So simula pa lang nakikita na natin yung desire ni Marcos to be this strongman. Imagine if you're the president who won new territory, expanded the Philippine territory in that period. So para kang bumubuo na ng empire mo in Southeast Asia pala ang dating, no? And ito talagang si Marcos, no? Parang yung last episode natin, binabanggit natin yung Spartan influence ng 300. So ngayon naman, parang empire building naman pala ang gusto niyang gawin. And then, this is 1968. And then later on, we will see him declare martial law. He really wants power. And I think that's really the core of it.
And given the historical context also of the period na mayroong lumalakas na pan-Islamic movement sa Southeast Asia na inisponsor halimbawa nila Gaddafi sa Libya, kumbaga it was really the last straw nung historic na binabagit natin na historic na oppression at marginalization ng mga Muslim. Kaya understandable kung paano nito sinimulan yung Muslim liberation movement in Mindanao na hanggang ngayon, tulad ng binanggit nyo, ay patuloy pa rin na nararanasan ng bansa. So, ang bigat ng issue na to, I'm sure madami pang mga issue na hindi namin nabanggit or napag-usapan. So, kung meron kayong gustong idagdag sa discussion, your engagements are very much welcome.
You can do this, of course, through our social media pages. So, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Continue listening to our other episodes through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube.
And as always, visit our website, that's podcast.org, where you can find all of our episodes and where you can learn more about the show. So thank you very much for joining us and have a good day.